The courtroom was set, the tension was palpable, and Karen was about to make a scene. She walked in, her demeanor full of entitlement, her eyes scanning the room like she owned it. She had a bone to pick and nothing was going to stand in her way, not even Judge Judy. As the case began, Karen wasted no time. She launched into an angry tirade, accusing everyone in the room of not understanding her struggles. "You don't know what it's like to live under rules that don't make sense," she snapped, her voice dripping with arrogance. To her, this was just another small inconvenience, another battle where her entitled attitude could shine through. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. But Judge Judy wasn't the one to back down. Far from it. She listened intently, her face calm, her posture still. Karen thought she had the upper hand, her voice rising with each passing second, her words full of indignation. She believed she could break Judge Judy's composure, make her second-guess her authority. But what Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy had faced much worse. In fact, it was Karen who was about to underestimate the real force in this courtroom. Despite Karen's shouting and defiance, Judge Judy stood firm, unshaken, as though she had already seen this play before. The more Karen yelled, the more Judge Judy's silence became her weapon. She wasn't just some judge doling out punishments. Judy was the underdog here, up against an entitled Karen who thought she could bulldoze through the rules. But Judy's calm demeanor wasn't weakness. It was the quiet confidence of someone who knew that power wasn't about volume, it was about control. The stage was set, and the real drama was just about to unfold. As Karen continued to shout, her words slicing through the air like a broken record, Judge Judy remained still, her expression as composed as ever. Karen's ranting was nothing new to Judy. She had witnessed this type of defiance countless times before. Entitled individuals who believed that the rules didn't apply to them, who thought that their money, status, or influence could shield them from consequences. But Karen had made one fatal mistake. She underestimated Judge Judy's ability to expose the truth. While Karen's voice grew louder, Judge Judy's sharp eyes never wavered from the paperwork in front of her. She wasn't fazed by Karen's theatrics. She had been here before, facing the arrogance of individuals who thought their privilege would save them from accountability. But Karen's attitude wasn't going to rattle her. In fact, it only fueled Judy's resolve to make sure that justice prevailed. The case wasn't just about minor violations or Karen's refusal to comply with HOA rules, it was about something much larger. Karen had made a spectacle of herself in the neighborhood, flaunting the rules, ignoring the complaints, and now she had the audacity to challenge Judge Judy in front of an entire courtroom. But this wasn't just about Karen's rude behavior, it was about setting a precedent. If people like her weren't held accountable, who would be next? And that was something Judge Judy couldn't allow. As Karen's tirade reached its peak, Judy did something unexpected. She held up her hand, silencing Karen instantly. The entire room froze, the tension thick in the air. Karen's face was red, her chest heaving with frustration, but she wasn't prepared for what was about to come next. Judge Judy spoke with authority, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Enough," she said, her gaze locking onto Karen. "You've made your point, now let's get to the facts." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Judge Judy continued, unbothered by the interruption. "I've been given your violation tickets," she said, pulling out a thick stack of papers. Karen's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected this. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment where her own actions would be brought to light, and there was nowhere for her to hide. Judy's gaze swept over the stack of tickets, each one marking a different violation. The room was so quiet you could almost hear a pin drop. This wasn't just about one or two mistakes, this was a pattern of disregard for the rules, a pattern of defiance. "Let's begin," Judge Judy said, her voice calm but sharp. She flipped the first page and with a slow, deliberate motion, she began to read the charges aloud. The first violation was for a noise complaint, one that Karen had outright ignored after multiple warnings. The next violation was for unsanctioned modifications to her property, modifications that had been made without approval from the HOA. Karen had been warned, given plenty of time to correct the issue, but she had chosen to disregard every directive. As the list of violations grew longer, Karen's smug expression began to falter. The room could feel the change, her defensive posture was starting to waver. She was no longer the confident person who had barged into the courtroom, demanding attention. Now she was exposed, her arrogance unraveling. But Karen wasn't the only one who was beginning to change. Judge Judy's control of the courtroom was becoming undeniable. With each violation, Judy's voice became more assertive, her delivery flawless. She didn't just read the tickets, she exposed Karen's behavior. The audience in the courtroom and those watching at home could see the contrast between Karen's attitude and Judge Judy's unwavering professionalism. Karen had assumed that by yelling loud enough, she could intimidate Judge Judy into backing down. But the more Karen ranted, the more she painted herself into a corner. The tickets didn't stop. Karen had racked up a total of 22 violations, each one a testament to her complete lack of respect for the rules. And each one carried its own consequence: fines, warnings, and ultimately the possibility of eviction from the community. But it wasn't just the fines that were the real penalty here. Karen had just made herself the centerpiece of an all-too-public display of entitlement and misconduct, and there was no way she could erase the shame that would follow. Judge Judy wasn't just reading the tickets. She was systematically dismantling Karen's defense, showing everyone in the courtroom just how serious the situation was. She wasn't just a judge, she was the underdog in this battle, standing against a woman who thought she could scream her way out of responsibility. Karen, now sweating and visibly uncomfortable, attempted to interrupt again. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "These violations are all fabricated. I've never been treated like this in my life." But Judge Judy was unshaken, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at Karen. "The facts don't lie," she said simply, flipping to the next page. "And neither do the law-abiding citizens of your neighborhood." By now, Karen was no longer yelling. Her voice had softened, though it was clear she still couldn't accept what was happening. The tables had turned. She had come into this courtroom thinking she could bully Judge Judy, but now she was facing the consequences of her own actions. The tickets, the fines, the violations, they weren't just numbers or pieces of paper. They were a clear reflection of Karen's complete disregard for the rules. And Judge Judy had made sure that every single violation was brought to light, no matter how loud or defensive Karen tried to get. This wasn't about Karen's entitled outbursts anymore. This was about accountability. This was about a judge who understood that sometimes silence and facts spoke louder than anything else. As Karen sat there, now deflated, the reality of the situation began to set in. She had hoped to walk into the courtroom, make a scene, and walk out with her reputation intact. But in the span of 47 seconds, Judge Judy had completely turned the tables, and there was nothing Karen could do to stop it. And this was just the beginning. What Karen didn't realize was that Judge Judy's calm, measured handling of the situation wasn't weakness, it was her strength. She wasn't here to fight Karen's emotional battles. She was here to lay down the law. And as each violation ticket was read aloud, it was clear: Karen was about to learn that her entitlement wouldn't save her here. Karen's face, once flush with arrogance, began to pale as Judge Judy continued to read the list of her violations. She had stormed into the courtroom thinking she could bully her way through, but with each violation her defense crumbled further. The first few tickets, unsanctioned property changes, complaints about noise and violations of HOA regulations, were only the beginning. There was a pattern emerging, one that couldn't be ignored. Another ticket for parking violations? Judge Judy's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. Karen's car, parked without permits in the neighborhood's restricted zones, had been towed several times. And yet there it was, another charge added to the list. It wasn't just about the fines anymore. It was about Karen's blatant disregard for every rule that had been set in place. The HOA, the neighbors, the community, it all seemed irrelevant to her. With every ticket Judy read aloud, Karen's face flushed deeper. She could feel the walls closing in. It wasn't just the fines that were stacking up, it was the fact that everyone in the room could now see her for who she truly was, a woman who thought the rules didn't apply to her. But the deeper the rabbit hole went, the more desperate Karen became. This is ridiculous," Karen shouted, her voice rising again, echoing through the courtroom. "These are all lies. They're just trying to make me look bad. I've never done anything wrong." She slammed her fist onto the desk in front of her, her voice cracking with emotion. But Judge Judy wasn't fazed by the outburst. Her gaze remained steady, calm, and unwavering. It was as if she could see through Karen's theatrics to the real truth beneath, the truth that was unfolding with every violation ticket read aloud. Karen leaned forward, desperate now. "You don't understand," she hissed, her voice dripping with condescension. "These violations are all made up. I'm the victim here." Her eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for anyone who would take her side, but the room was silent. No one was on her side. Not now. Judge Judy didn't flinch. Instead, she flipped another page and continued reading. Karen's outbursts only served to highlight the depth of her entitlement, and Judge Judy's composure only made her seem more formidable in contrast. Karen had walked in expecting to dictate the terms, to make the case about her own grievances. But now she was trapped in a web of her own making. The audience in the courtroom was riveted, watching as the confrontation between Karen and Judge Judy escalated. Karen had begun to lose control. Her voice, which had been so confident at the start, was now a broken mixture of anger and disbelief. She could no longer deny the truth that was staring her in the face. She had violated the rules and she had no defense left. But instead of accepting responsibility, she lashed out, trying to turn the tables by attacking the process itself. "I demand to speak to the head of the HOA," Karen shouted, her hands trembling in frustration. "This is all a conspiracy. I won't stand for this." Her eyes flashed with fury, but it was clear now. Her fury was born from fear, not confidence. She was starting to understand that this wasn't a battle she could win through bluster and accusations. Judge Judy waited for a moment, letting the tension hang in the air. When Karen finally stopped speaking, out of breath and still fuming, Judge Judy responded with the kind of calm that only she could muster. "Karen," she began, her voice cutting through the silence, "you've had your say. Now it's time to listen." Karen's mouth opened, ready to protest, but Judy raised her hand, silencing her once again. This wasn't just about the violations anymore. This was about showing Karen that her usual tactics, her yelling, her manipulation, her sense of entitlement, weren't going to work here. Not in Judge Judy's courtroom. "Karen, I don't care about your excuses," Judy continued, her tone unwavering. "I'm reading the violations because they are the facts. You can shout all you want, but they won't change." Judge Judy's words were sharp, yet measured. It wasn't just about correcting Karen's behavior, it was about taking back control of the courtroom. It was about making sure that Karen's arrogance didn't dictate the pace of the trial. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists, and took a step forward. "You don't understand. I have money. I have influence. You can't do this to me." Her words rang out, louder now, but the desperation was clear. Karen thought her wealth and power could intimidate Judge Judy into backing down, but Judge Judy wasn't impressed by Karen's threats. She had seen this kind of behavior before. The courtroom fell into complete silence as Judge Judy slowly stood up, her eyes locking onto Karen's. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "If you think your money and influence will get you out of this, you are sadly mistaken," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "The law applies to everyone, Karen. And you will face the consequences for your actions." Karen's defiance faltered. She had come into the courtroom ready to challenge Judge Judy, ready to use her privilege to push her way through. But the reality was setting in. The violation tickets weren't going anywhere. Judge Judy wasn't backing down. And with every moment that passed, it became clearer to everyone in the room. Karen had not just come to face Judge Judy. She had come to face the law itself. And in that moment, it wasn't Karen's wealth or status that mattered. It was the truth. Karen sat back down, her shoulders slumped, the anger slowly draining from her. She wasn't winning this. Judge Judy had outmaneuvered her at every turn, and there was nothing Karen could do to change the outcome. Her own words, her own arrogance, had led her to this point. And now there was no escape. Judge Judy's control was absolute, and Karen was left with nothing but her own shattered pride. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen sat, her face red and swollen with frustration, her eyes darting around the room as though looking for some way to escape. She had walked in with the belief that she could control the situation, that she could outshout and outsmart Judge Judy. But as the seconds ticked by, it became painfully clear that Judge Judy was in full control, and Karen's theatrics only made her look weaker. Karen's heart raced as Judge Judy moved on to the final set of violation tickets. This was the moment Karen had been dreading, the culmination of her reckless behavior, now laid bare for everyone to see. She had hoped that her rants and the social isolation, the whispers, the judgment, this was the real punishment Karen wasn't prepared for. Her reputation was tarnished, and nothing could erase the stain of her arrogance. Meanwhile, Judge Judy sat in her chair, the gavel now silent, but her reputation firmly intact. Her quiet authority, her ability to remain unshaken in the face of insults and provocations, had once again proven why she was the undeniable force in that courtroom. Karen may have come in with arrogance and defiance, but Judge Judy had left her with nothing but the cold, hard truth. And as Judge Judy rose to exit the courtroom, her eyes met the camera's lens for a brief moment. The brief, almost imperceptible nod she gave was all the affirmation anyone needed. Justice had been served. Karen may have thought she could yell her way out of trouble, but in the end, it was Judge Judy's quiet, relentless pursuit of fairness that had won the day. As Karen was escorted out of the courtroom, the doors closing softly behind her, the atmosphere shifted. It was as though the entire room took a collective breath. The chaos, the yelling, the defiance, all of it was suddenly gone. And in its place was the cold, stark reality of the consequences. For Karen, this was not just a defeat, it was a reckoning. The consequences of her actions were now unavoidable. Outside the courtroom, Karen's mind raced. She had come in with so much confidence, ready to throw her weight around, convinced that Judge Judy's reputation and the rules of the courtroom didn't apply to her. But now, with the fines hanging over her head, she found herself standing in the shadow of her own arrogance. The truth was undeniable. She had violated the rules repeatedly, ignored warnings, and pushed every limit she could find. And now she was left to face it all alone. Her car, still parked illegally outside the courthouse, was the first reminder of her defiance. The flashing lights of the tow truck, which had already been summoned, would soon remind her of the consequences waiting for her back home. The ticket she would receive would be another addition to her ever-growing list of violations. Karen's world was crumbling and the walls were closing in. But it wasn't just about the fines anymore. Karen knew deep down that this wasn't a small matter. She had become the subject of ridicule, her name now linked to entitlement and dishonesty. She was no longer just the angry neighbor, the one who could throw tantrums and avoid responsibility. She was the woman who had tried to bully a judge and had failed spectacularly. Her community, her friends, and even her family would see her differently now. Karen's pride was shattered, and there was no escaping that. She had walked into the courtroom hoping to assert her power, but it was Judge Judy, calm and collected, who had turned the tide. Karen had spent years believing that her wealth, her position, and her attitude could shield her from the consequences of her actions. But today Judge Judy had made it crystal clear that no one is above the law. In the courtroom, however, it was business as usual. Judge Judy's decision had been final and the case was closed. But Judy's role wasn't just about making decisions and handing down sentences. She was the mediator of accountability, the one who made sure the rules were upheld and that fairness was always at the forefront. As she sat in her chambers, going over her notes for the day's cases, she reflected on what had just transpired. Judge Judy didn't feel satisfaction from the punishment itself. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had restored order, that justice had been done in a way that left no room for doubt. Karen had come in with entitlement, and Judy had shown her that the law was not something to be bent to one's will. The underdog had won, and that in itself was a victory. Yet, Judge Judy knew that the fallout wasn't just contained within the walls of the courtroom. The repercussions of this case would echo in Karen's life for months, even years to come. Her neighbors, her colleagues, and the community she had once dominated would all be watching. Her reputation was shattered. No amount of money or status could undo the humiliation she had brought upon herself. Back in the courtroom, the remaining cases proceeded. Judy's firm, measured decisions continued as usual, but there was a lingering sense that today's case had been different. Today Judy had faced down entitlement, defiance, and arrogance, and she had won. The room was quieter, the energy a little different. Perhaps the other defendants were wondering if they too could get away with yelling at a judge. Would they, like Karen, be exposed for their actions? Outside the courthouse, Karen's world was just beginning to unravel. She had tried to avoid the truth for so long, hiding behind excuses and anger. But now the truth was laid bare. Her entitlement, which had once given her the confidence to believe she could bulldoze over anyone, was now her greatest weakness. The very attitude that she thought would protect her had destroyed her. The whispers would start, first among her neighbors, then among her colleagues. The community would start to talk about her, how she had tried to intimidate a judge and failed. How she had been handed a staggering fine and sent packing, her arrogance shattered by the one woman she thought she could overpower. Karen had tried to outshout the system, and the system had responded with undeniable consequences. Judge Judy, for her part, didn't dwell on the case for long. She had done what she needed to do and it was over. But there was always the next case, another person who thought they could bypass the rules. For Judge Judy, this was more than just about one defendant. It was about sending a message that no one, no matter their status, was exempt from the law. Karen's journey wasn't over, though. The consequences were only just beginning. The fines were just the start. What Karen didn't realize was that her reputation would follow her, just as the penalties would. The road ahead would be long, full of judgment from those around her, and the sense of entitlement she once carried would no longer protect her. In the end, it would be her own actions that defined her, and they would remain a part of her story forever. And as for Judge Judy? She had made sure that Karen's arrogance was brought to its knees, and in doing so, she had sent a message that would resonate far beyond the courtroom. As the courtroom doors closed behind Karen, the sound of her retreating footsteps was the last echo of a dramatic and unsettling chapter. For her, the consequences were just beginning. The fines, the community's judgment, and the internal realization that her entitled world had crumbled around her. This was the fallout. Her reputation was forever altered, and no amount of shouting or deflection could undo what Judge Judy had exposed. But for Judge Judy, it was business as usual. The case had been dealt with swiftly and justly as always. She wasn't in the business of making waves or playing to the cameras. Her job was to bring fairness into the courtroom, to ensure that everyone, no matter their background, faced the same scrutiny and accountability. And today she had done just that. It wasn't about the drama, the theatrics, or the theatrically loud defendants. It was about justice. As the next case rolled in, Judge Judy didn't pause. She moved with her usual precision, sharp wit, and unwavering confidence. Karen was forgotten, but the message was clear. Entitlement and arrogance have no place in this courtroom. But the reverberations of the day's events would follow Karen. The fine was just the beginning. The community she had once tried to control with her arrogance now saw her for what she truly was. The once untouchable Karen had been knocked off her pedestal. There was no running from the truth. She had been exposed not just for the violations, but for her complete lack of accountability. For the public, for the viewers at home, this was more than just a courtroom drama. It was a stark reminder of the power of accountability. Judge Judy had done what she always does. She upheld the law with grace, fairness, and without hesitation. There was no room for leniency when the facts were clear, and no one, not even a loud and arrogant Karen, was going to bypass the system. Judge Judy's lesson was simple. The law applies to everyone. The power of her calm, controlled demeanor wasn't just in her words. It was in her ability to stand firm in the face of defiance. She wasn't rattled by Karen's outbursts or her attempts to manipulate the situation. She saw through the noise and dealt with the facts. And in doing so, she restored the balance in the courtroom, reminding everyone that no one is above the law, not even the loudest voices in the room. As the gavel fell for the final time that day, Judge Judy's eyes met the camera once more, her expression a subtle mix of resolve and quiet satisfaction. The day's work was done. The lesson had been taught, and the scales of justice had been balanced. If you think Karen got what she deserved, don't forget to hit subscribe and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that no one is above the law. Stay tuned for more stories where justice reigns, and arrogance meets its match in Judge Judy's courtroom.